Hi, I'd like to share a little story about raising a child, expecting them to do the best and be the best. You know, you are a reflection of your parents. A lot of times, you invest in your child the qualities that you feel are the best for them. You know, you want them to work hard, you want them to have a good personality, you want them to never quit. And those things are nurtured inside your kid. You have to understand who you are as an individual. And I'm not a family expert. I'm just a guy who had kids, raised my kids, and I'm very proud of my kids. Like my youngest son, he's on a path to become a doctor. And to this day, I don't know how that happens. I was just doing my job. And the thing is this, I always kept him accountable. You know, I involved him in sports. So if you're a young man and you're going to raise a family, I would tell you right now, be very present in your child's life. Make sure that you're giving them a challenge, because if you give your kids too much, then they grow up not appreciating the things they have, and you want them to live up to their full potential. Sometimes them living up to their full potential will never satisfy you, but the thing is that you're just a steward. You're there to provide the avenues for them to travel upon. The thing is this, if your kid, like when I was raising my kid or my children, if one of my children liked art, I always made sure that I provided artwork, you know, like paper and pens and pencils and crayons and markers. That way they could indulge themselves in that aspect of their creativity. My youngest son loved playing soccer. He loved kicking the ball. So guess what? I put him in soccer. I put him in sports at a real young age. But my theory on that was for me to be a father and just to go out and kick the ball with my kid. You know, children have a way of wanting to please their parent. So my son, he got a chance to play with his dad. So he was kicking that ball. He was trying to be the best. And before you knew it, that's who he was. He became a soccer player. The kid won a national championship when he was 12. He went on to play high school, collegiate, and then he ended up getting hurt in college. But then he decided to pursue a medical career. And even then, even as a parent coaching your child, you're saying, look, you know, being a physical therapist is pretty good, but you're going to go to school for the same amount of time as you would a doctor. And to me, a doctor is a little more specialized. You know, than a physical therapist is very important. But I just felt like my son had the potential to go after a medical degree, and that's what he ended up doing. I made it so it was his decision. All I did was lay out the facts, and he chose, you know, what he wanted to do. And the thing is that, as far as to me, sometimes I feel like, man, I was lucky. I was lucky to have a son like that, because I just gave him the direction of where to go and how to do it, and he followed my direction, and that's what made my life so easy. I never had a problem with that guy. You know, I always made him accountable. You know, I told him, like, you got to go to practice on time, and you always have to be there, ready to play. And a lot of times, you know, he was a little guy when I started taking him. I took him at a very young age, and the thing is that he just acclimated to it, because what happened is we started developing good habits for him. You know, being athletic and you know, that's a good habit. You know, you're out there, you're running, you're getting physical. Being a competitor was also part of that deal. Very competitive young man. And the thing is that I think that's where sports are very vital to children, and that's where they get that edge. Some kids are built that way, others are not. I mean, I have a grandson that we've put him in football, we've put him in different sporting situations, and it's just not for him. And you, as a parent, have to respect that. So I told my daughter, who is the parent of my grandson, I says, look, if he likes art, then nurture him in art. He's a creative. You have to understand. You have to read the room. You have to know what kind of child you have. And like I said, you always have to push yourself and you always have to go for your best, and you always have to live up to your potential. And unless you have somebody that's there as a guiding force, it's just that much more difficult not to do it. I mean, you have too many people. They work there 8 hours, and they come home and they want to sit on the couch, watch TV, and they don't have any one-on-one interaction with their kids. I think that would be a big mistake. If you're a young parent and you're raising a kid, keep your kid active. Keep your kid doing something. Spend time with that person, that little person. Have conversations with that person. Talk to him about things that you'd want him to know. Talk to him about just the bigger issues, the things that affect you, not the bad things, Just tell them, try to show them that you're also trying to solve the bigger issues in your life, And if you talk to them the right way, they understand. It goes a long way, in my opinion. I'm not going to say that all parents are good. I'm not going to say that all parenting is ideal. Everybody's cut from a different cloth. Everybody's raised a different way. The way I raised my kids is definitely not the way my father raised me. He was a harder man. He was a more harsh individual. And the thing is that, to me, as a father, when I was a father, I said, there's some things that I'm not going to do with my kid that my dad did to me. But I also understand that sometimes you have to be firm with your children, and you have to give them a firm example. You're gonna have to want them to find something inside of them that gives them purpose, that gives them a plan. You don't, like you said, idle minds are the playground of the devil. I believe in that. Is it idle hands or idle minds? All I can tell you is this: is that you got to keep your kid busy. You got to keep your kid preoccupied, and you got to keep them engaged. And that's the hardest part of keeping your child engaged. I mean, I look at it like this, your kid goes to school, you're at work, the mom takes over, she's doing the best. Moms love their kids so much. I always was a proponent to say, hey man, you can love your kid too much, where you could hurt them, where they're afraid, they're like the boy in the plastic bubble. Sometimes, a little adversity goes a long way. And that's why I was always a big fan of sports for children, because it had them challenge themselves. They had to achieve. They had to do something. They had to compete. And the thing is that as parents see their kids struggling in a sport and the kid might not be the best player, then they give up. Like, oh, you don't have to go, or just, hey, just take a seat. You can't give up on your kid because you're giving up on yourself. Because what you're going to do is all you're doing is pushing that problem down the line. So when your kid's a 25-year-old kid who's unmotivated because you didn't provide that framework or that foundation, then you're going to be disappointed. I just feel like if you're in your 20s, the last thing you should be thinking about is getting a girlfriend, getting married. Yeah, you could have a girlfriend, someone to talk to, but you have to understand, you have to build the way you built your foundation when you were a young child. You got through high school. That was you building your foundation. That same foundation is what's going to help you get through your 20s. And that's the more crucial one, because that defines who you will be for the rest of your life. If you get out of high school and then you decide to go to college and you pick a good major, something that is vital, something that is going to keep you working, or maybe you have that kind of mind that you're an entrepreneur, you could create something, you could do something. But I'll tell you something right now, there's not a lot of paths that can take you down that road. You have to be really sharp. For me, when I was a young man, I always wanted, I was into drawing and all that. I was I had artistic value. I loved music. And, my ultimate dream job would have been to be a comic book artist. But then, I didn't have a nurturing family that would say, hey, art's a good thing. They were thinking too much of like fine arts, like Picasso or Da Vinci. They didn't realize, like, with an art degree, you could go into so many different aspects of things. You can be in the advertising world. You can do logos. You can do so many other things. But the thing is that I came from parents I'm a son of an immigrant, and we came here and you're basically trying to establish yourself, and you're looking for the opportunity that's going to provide you security. And the thing is that sometimes you don't have time for the luxury of, of not being locked in on something, because time happens so fast. You know, by the time I was 23, I was married. I had one child, and I was working for for the gas company. And the thing is that, let me tell you a weird story. I always think about it. I don't know how. I don't know how. It just resonated with me because I never forgot it. I was on Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago reading gas meters. And I happened upon this store, where they sell the candles, and it's like, I don't want to say it's witchcraft, but it's like a lot of that kind of stuff it's like the herbs and spices and a lot of whacked out stuff. Some of it's legit, some of it is like, I couldn't even explain it. And the guy, one of the men that was working there, or he was the owner of the building, he like dogged me and says, "What are you doing? You got this job?" I go, "Yeah, I got a job. I'm working." But he basically told me, like, the job you got really ain't worth nothing. You don't really have a career. And that baffled me. I says, "But what? I'm working." And it messed me up because I was raising my family with that money. But it made me. It reminded me that, you know what? This is not. This is something I could do better than what I'm doing. And because of that weird conversation, I ended up shifting gears and moving into a different career. I would have been fine working at the utility. But the thing is that that conversation made me feel like I needed to compete some more. So I ended up getting into the trade and to the trades, and that there is a physical job in itself, but it pays well, and and to raise it, and I needed more money to raise a family. You'd be surprised how expensive families are, and if you're not making a certain amount of money, then your kids are gonna always be without. Thankfully, my kids have never been without; they've always had. And that's another thing. Life will tell you when you got to be, picking it up. And the reality is that only through failure, your own personal failures, can you relate these things to your children. And you could only try to help them by guiding them, but you can't make them do what you want them to do. I mean, unless you're really that strong of a force, which I totally believe that, I don't want a kid to be raised and be resentful of the things that I tried to do for him in a good way, because he didn't receive it like that, and he's miserable and he hates the things he does in his life. I think it's important to value who you are and value what you do, but you also have to know that the way I was raised, it has to have some kind of value. And the thing is that, you have to reach your full potential, whether that's academic or whether that's, at work. But the thing is that only you know where you should be and how you should be doing things. And these are conversations that, as a parent, when I would take my kid to tournaments, I'd have time in the car. I would talk to him about making good decisions and focusing on what he wants in the future, and how things happen so fast that every decision he's making, whether he knows it or not, will affect him for the rest of his life. And all three of my kids. Now, I'm not gonna say they're all perfect. They all have their ups and their downs, but for the most part, they did okay. But life's never easy, and that's why you have to have these good conversations, and you have to have these serious conversations with your kids, or with your loved ones, because, like, before you know it, it's a different ball game altogether. And look at me. I mean, in a short 25 years since I started the trades, I'm getting ready to retire in about another 5 years. So the reality of it is that everything you do is based on your decision making. But if you don't have the foundation, if you don't have somebody that can share important things with you, or the way things work in life, you may not reach your potential. And that's what life's about, man. Is being happy and reaching your potential and living a good life. So I just wanted to impart this little bit of insight from me to you, in case you didn't have somebody sharing this with you. That way, like, hey, these things matter. And like I said, just make good decisions and focus on what's good, and you'll be okay. Thank you.